Hello, this video is going to show Sandbox employees how to submit an expense report in Workday for reimbursement. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start at one.woostel.edu. I recommend that you bookmark this by clicking the star. That should work in most browsers that you'll use, or whatever way works for that browser. Once you have this bookmarked, then you can always easily get to it. I always start here because one.woostel is a great, that's a hub for all the online portals that WashU has access to for its employees. So when I go into here, I can use the search bar here to search Workday login. And then once I find the app that I need, in this case, the Workday login application, I click this little heart icon, and that will bring this always up in my favorites whenever I log in. I log in here using my Woostel key and password, and now all of my favorites are listed at the top, and I easily have access to my Workday login. So when I click that, that brings me to my Workday homepage. Now, once we're here, we're going to need to go to our expenses hub. Now, there are a couple of ways to get there. The easiest way is if you have it listed in your top apps. Now, this top apps is not the most frequently used or your favorite apps. It's literally the top 4 apps in the list of all the applications that you have access to. So these are my top 4 apps. If you want to see all the apps, you can click here, or in the top left, you can click the little hamburger menu icon, and that brings up your apps list. So here's my list of apps. Yours may differ from mine since my security is slightly different than yours. But the top 4 applications right here are also the top 4 listed here. So you can see they're literally the top 4 apps. If you want to edit these, if your expenses hub is somewhere down the list, you can click edit, and you can drag and drop these things around. Once you move them into the positioning that you want, then the top 4 apps that you want to have show up on your homepage are there. You can just click Save Changes, and now this will contain your top 4 apps. So once you find your Expenses Hub, you're going to click that button, which will bring you to your Expenses Hub page. Now here, there's a little bit of navigation here. These 5 buttons here, or menu options, will link you to different parts of the Expenses Hub. Expense reports, expense transactions, your travel profile, payment elections, which if you're not aware, this is where you can go to set up different bank accounts for when you're getting reimbursed versus your payroll if you want to have different accounts for that, or if you'd rather have a check payment go out instead of a electronic funds transfer. But going back to the overview, this is where we're going to want to go for expense reports, for creating expense reports. And you can see this tasks section right in the middle, and create expense reports right here. So you're going to click that button, and that will link to the create expense report. So now that we have the create expense report task up, you're going to see your name listed here at the top, and a few of these options will be pre-filled in for you. These are all required options here, as well as the account number. Now, the ones that are pre-filled, for example, create new expense report, you're going to want to leave that alone. Also leave the company and company and expense line alone. And also please do not change the expense report date. That should always be today's date. The memo should always be a somewhat descriptive but not too lengthy note. I usually recommend medium to short length sentence. For example, in this case, for this example, I am going to be submitting a receipt for materials, supplies for reimbursement, as well as a reimbursement for some software. So I can just put in a note saying reimburse for software and materials, supplies, purchases. So that's a pretty good description. It's basically, this is just going to give us an idea of what we're going to find in the report. So if you get a little too plain with this, if you just say expenses for the week of September 15th, that's not going to be as helpful because it doesn't really describe what's in the report. So we want to have a description of what we're going to find here. Now, the next thing we have to fill out is the business purpose. Now, you can see that when we click here, there's a drop-down box. The vast majority of these, 15 or so options, are travel-related options. So if you are traveling, there's actually another video that I have that you can look at to learn how to submit travel expenses. In this case, we're looking at non-travel expenses. So anytime you're not traveling, this is always going to be your option. So one shoe fits all for one size fits all for non-travel expenses. So you'll always choose this option. So once that's selected, the last thing you might want to do is adjust the account. So you do have a default account just set up for your security in Workday. If you do have a different account and you're not sure what it is, I do encourage you to reach out to the business office, contact me, John Fowey, or Kim Anderson, or Meredith Guger. Any of us can help you track down the correct account number if you're unsure which account you're supposed to be charging. So for this example, I'm going to leave it here to the Sandbox Administration Cost Center. So then we click OK in the bottom left corner. And that was the header. So now we're working with the expense lines page. The first thing I'm going to do is click this orange add button. You have to add a new expense line. So this expense line, this drop-down box with expense line, these other options are only available to me because I do have some quick expense in the system, which I'll cover in a different video. And credit card transactions are because I have Pro Card. If you don't have a Pro Card or quick expenses, then when you click add, it'll automatically add a new expense line. But in this case, I'm just going to click right here, and it brings up a new line. So you can see this kind of gray highlighted line with a blue bar next to it. That means that I'm selecting this line, I'm looking at this line. I want to give you a quick overview of the layout of the expense line screen. It's split into three parts. You have this top section here, and then you have this column down here on the left-hand side, and then you have this large area here that shows a lot of information with a bunch of blanks right now. So starting here at the top, this is a summary of the entire expense report. So the red bar, you can always look up here to see what you're currently doing. If you're editing, if you're viewing but not editing, if you're creating, in this case, we're creating an expense report, it always tells you what task you're working with in Workday. Most times you'll just be viewing things, but you could also be, in this case, creating. And then next to that, you'll see the description of the expense report that you're creating. You have the expense report number as well as the memo line that you just entered on your header earlier. Next, you have the summary of the payee and the draft status. So right now we haven't submitted this yet, so it's in draft. If you're reviewing this later, this might be in complete status, or maybe it was sent back, or it's maybe waiting on a review or an approval. Then all these lines over here are basically telling you different ways that we're going to be charging the lines in the expense report. And then the total obviously is just a combination of all of these dollar amounts together will be totaled up here. Whether you have charges or credits, it's going to balance everything out and tell you exactly how much the expense report is valued at. Next, we have this column down here on the left. So this is where we're actually going to have lines. So if this was a paper report, each one of these would be its own page, basically. Think of it that way. And each page or each line is going to be equivalent to one single transaction. Now, each transaction might have more than one document attached to it for backup documentation, for reimbursement, for receipts, etc. You might have an invoice and a paid receipt. You might have some additional documentation explaining what the charge was for. If you have just the payment slip saying that your credit card was charged, but then you have another document showing the details, etc. But each line will represent a single transaction. And then once you've selected a line, like in this case, we have one line, and this blue bar means that we have it selected. Over here on this side over here, you will see all the details for that line. So you're just going to see a summary of this line. You'll see a dollar amount and what kind of charge it was. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. But this is where you're going to see the details for the expense. Now, when it comes to filling in the details for an expense, there are four main parts that you need to be concerned with. First, you need to attach a receipt, and that's going to be done in this highlighted box here where it says drop files here. You can just drag and drop in, or you can select this button and browse your computer. The next thing you'll need to do is change the expense date. This date should always match the transaction date. So if you have a receipt and it says your credit card was charged on this date, that date should be listed here. Next is the expense item. The expense item is a text-based field. It's a searchable field, or it's a search field which searches a database in Workday. But it's completely text-based. There are no number or numeric codes to remember. So if you bought books, you could type books. If you took a taxi, you could type taxi, etc. So when I'm going to show you the examples that I have here for the two receipts I'm about to upload for this. But just to let you know, you can type whatever word you want in here. It is a smart search field, so even if you don't get it exactly right to what's in the database, it it is pretty, it's a pretty smart field, and it will give you some pretty good options. And if no options show up, then just keep trying until you find an option that works. And then that was the first three things: receipt, expense date, expense item, and finally the total amount. So when you select an expense item, it will produce a couple of additional fields, which you can just ignore. The total amount is going to be the key. This should equal the amount that you're requesting for reimbursement. And I'll go over that here in a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do drag and drop a receipt into this box here. So first we have a BLIC receipt. All right, so we pull that in. And I do want to give you a couple tips and tricks here. So first of all, this was a JPEG. You can see here's the JPEG file versus a PDF file. Okay, so I'm starting with a JPEG file, and I've shown you this because when I've uploaded that, you can see there's kind of a miniature image here. If you click on that image, it'll actually give you a blown up version of the receipt, so you can see very clearly what was purchased. You can see the date and all that, but you can't click on the name. There's no hyperlink here. You can update your line by pulling in the information that you just added. So now it shows that I've uploaded a receipt by showing this little receipt icon. You still have this, but now you also have a clickable hyperlink here. In the case of a JPEG, if you click this, it's just going to download it. In the case of the PDF, which I'll show you in a little bit, that's the only way you're going to be able to manipulate this screen in order to view the document, to view the uploaded document live in the expense report. So for now, we have this receipt here for BLIC, and I do want to go over very quickly the 5 main parts of a receipt. This is policy set up by Washington University Accounts Payable. If a receipt does not contain all 5 of these parts, it will be rejected, and we'll send it back to you and say you need to get us better documentation. So this is very important information. Please note these 5 things. So 5 parts of a valid receipt. First is it needs to show proof of origination. So basically, who's the vendor? So it has to have the name that we're being charged, who accepted our money. So in this case, BLIC Art Materials in St. Louis. Next, you have to have a transaction date. So we have here March 22nd. That's the receipt date. Next, you have to have line item details. So in this case, we have line item details. The item is here. Here's the description. Right? Even though it might be abbreviated and kind of hard to understand, this is definitely something that we purchased, and we can look that up. We can always go back to the vendor and say, can you tell us what this was? So we have to have those details. Next, we have to have the dollar amount that was charged, in this case, $10.15. And finally, we need to have proof of payment. In this case, we have Visa credit. We have the last 4 digits. It says there was a sale. So this is a valid receipt because it has those 5 parts: vendor name, receipt date, line item details, dollar amount, and proof of payment. All right, so this is a valid receipt, and now I have to pull in some parts of this. So first we have to look at the date. That is the transaction date on the expense line. So March 22nd, 23 is going to go right in here into the expense date. March 22nd, 2023. Now at BLIC, we bought some art supplies, and we're going to say that we bought these supplies for the classroom to support classroom student use of the materials. So in that case, we're going to use classroom supplies. So I type in classroom because I know that that's what the expense item is. If I wasn't sure what it was called, I could also just say supplies and then hit enter. And that brings up a list of all the different supplies-based expense items. All right, there's quite a few to choose from. I do want to point out in this category, there are a number of different options that might be appropriate for supplies you might be purchasing. It might be hardware supplies. Laboratory supplies is something we use in shops a lot. Classroom supplies is what we always use when we are buying materials for student use. And if we're buying materials for our own research as faculty, you're going to use museum and art supplies. So please keep those 2 separate. Classroom supplies is for the students. Museum and art supplies is for your own use. And there are a number of other things. Printer cartridges, consumable supplies is usually things like napkins, paper plates, plastic forks or compostable items, things like that. Things that are going to be used up, tissues, etc. So a number of these office supplies, obviously, is office supplies. Computer and software supplies is very similar. This computer softwares and supplies is a little bit different than computer software licenses. And if you're unsure which one to use, I would say just pick one and then give us a description of what it was you were purchasing and why, and we can help figure out if that's the right expense item or not. And that's kind of a key with all these expense reports, is just do your best to get the information as close as possible to what you think is correct, and then we can always adjust it from there, or we can discuss with you to figure out the right options. So in this case, once again, we're going to choose classroom supplies. All right, and then once we chose that, like I said, it popped up a couple of additional required fields, including quantity and per unit amount. But I always recommend just ignoring those. Quantity is basically the number of transactions on the line. There's only one transaction here, so quantity is always going to be one. We just need to know the total amount. And going back to the document here, we can confirm this was $10.15. So we just write in 10.15 with the decimal point. There we go. And then I just tab forward in order to get that to automatically calculate in, and then we're good. Now we can see that there's this red exclamation point. I do want to draw your attention to this because this is actually a hard stop error. When you see this, you will not be able to click submit, because it will say you need to fix this thing before you can submit this report. And if you need to know what that is, you can always click this red banner up here in the top right. So you can see there the error occurred because it's saying that the expense item, per unit amount, and total amount need to have values. Because when I originally had updated this, there was still zeros in here. But now that I've updated that there, what I can do is I can click this gray box again, click the line in order to pull in the new details that I just added, and that'll update that field. And now you can see those summary items are now in there, and the red exclamation point has gone away. It's been replaced by this yellow question mark box, which now is just an alert. This is more of a soft warning. It's letting you know, hey, be aware, there might be something wrong with this. Maybe just take a look at this, confirm, but it's not going to stop you from submitting the expense report. So if we click there, we can see it's asking us to turn in our expense report within 15 days after trip completion or business transaction. So that this is basically saying you need to be a little more expeditious with your submitting of receipts. WashU wants you to submit all receipts within 2 weeks or so of the transaction date. But again, it's not going to stop you from submitting these, even though were from March. You know, this is from 6 months ago. Again, this is just an example using an old receipt. In general, you should be getting receipts in right after you make the purchase. Please don't wait until the end of the semester or the end of the year and do everything all at once. You should be doing these things at least once every 2 weeks at most. I'm sorry, at most, you know, right away, and at least once every 2 weeks. And on the outside, if it gets down to like once a month, we're not gonna go hunting for you or anything. But we just want to make sure things are getting done in a timely manner. So now we've got everything updated here. I'm going to go ahead and add a second line. So you can go back up to this add button and click new expense again, or just click the add button if you don't have any other options, and you'll automatically get a second line added to the report. So here's our old line, and here's our new line. And it's automatically brought us to this new line so we can start adding new information. So I'm going to go back over to my document here, and I'm going to pull in this PDF. Now, once again, I mentioned earlier, as a JPEG, you pull it in, you can click right on here. But if I click on this, nothing happens. And I can't click on this because there's no hyperlink. So that happens when you first pull in the document. If you want to be able to click on this to view the document, you would have to update, which is then going to give you a bunch of errors because you haven't entered any of this in yet. So I recommend just kind of pulling this up, and you can see the details off to the side. So what I'm going to do, again, we have the receipt as step 1. Step 2 is the expense date. So let's check and see when this transaction happened. Looks like it happened for an order on May 19th. So we're going to change this to May 19th. And the expense item in this case is going to be software. All right. So we bought a student edition 1 year only. So that's a software supply. So when you have a time limited event like this for software, that typically indicates that you're buying a license to use. There might be a lifetime license. It might be for a single year, it might be for 5 years. So whatever the case may be, if you see a piece of software where you're time limited on it, you're buying a software license. If you purchase something and it's a software based thing, it might be like a font or something like that, where there is no time limited use with it, that's going to be the software and supplies option that I brought up earlier. I'll give you that option to show you what it was again. So something like a font or a piece of software that doesn't have a license attached to it, where you basically just purchased it and now you can use it, that's going to be computer softwares and supplies. In this case, because it's a license, if we just type in license, it brings a computer software license fees as well as a couple of other options. But this is the one we would choose for this. All right, and then once again, we've chosen that, but now it's popped open these two additional fields. We're just going to ignore those, and we're going to go directly to this total amount. And the total amount here is going to be $346.22. The reason I say that is because this line, sales tax, is not an allowable reimbursement expense. So you would not be able to submit this expense here. You would only be submitting the $346.22. So we'll put that in here, $346.22. All right, and then that's pretty much all the lines we needed there. Now we can come back up here. We can click the gray box on the left, the line, and that'll pull in the details that we've just added. And again, we're getting that yellow warning. It's going to be that same warning about submitting things within 15 days. But otherwise, we know this is a good report to submit. We don't have any hard stop errors, and all of our dates and our transaction details are correct, and we have receipts for both. We can see the receipt icon. Now would be good to submit this. I do want to show one additional piece of information, even though it doesn't apply to either of the receipts here. I do want to highlight this itemization box. I often see people clicking this itemization, this add button here, and then doing nothing with it. And I want to show you what that does. So this is how this should be submitted. When you have no itemizations, everything looks good. I can see the account that's being charged. I can verify all the information on the receipt. This is a good report to review. If you click itemization, and you're not actually itemizing anything, you're just kind of clicking this, and then everything looks the same. And you put in the dollar amount, you say, oh yeah, this was $346.22, great. And then you click done. Well, now you've got this itemized line over here, but it's a single line. You haven't itemized anything. You've just said the same line I had out there is now over here. The only thing it's actually done is it's hidden my account information. So now when I'm going in to review this, I don't know where you're charging this. I have to now do the extra step of clicking into this, view the account that you're charging, then click done, then go to the next line. And if you've done the same thing again, I have to keep clicking these extra buttons and closing out of it. It's adding extra time. So I recommend do not click that button unless you're actually going to itemize. There are two reasons you might want to itemize something, and only two reasons. One is if you need to actually split this charge into multiple accounts. Say you wanted to charge $100 to your research account, and then $246.22 to a different account. Then you would put a portion of it here, leaving you $100 left. And then you could click this add button down at the bottom, which adds a new itemization line. And you could take that other $100, $100, and you could charge a different account. You could charge, some professional allowance count. Right? So there's a different professional allowance accounts you could charge, right? So that would be a reason to itemize. Another reason might be if the actual charge had more than one expense item. You can't charge everything to the computer software license fees if you bought that, but you also, say this purchase was from, Office Max, and you went and bought a hard copy of a piece of software, and you got a license with it. So you're charging one portion there, but then you also bought $100 worth of computer printing paper. Well, then you're going to want that to go to office supplies, right? So this would also be a reason to itemize, because now you're splitting out to different expense items. Even if you're charging the same account, if you're charging a different account, it doesn't matter. This is a reason to itemize. Just to finish my example, this is what a properly itemized expense looks like. Okay. So when you click that add button, you're only going to click it because you need to split this account into multiple portions for different reasons, either different accounts or different expense items. But please don't ever click this button if you're just going to add the one line. Essentially, all I'm doing at that point is I'm going in here and I'm clicking the trash can button in order to delete those lines, and it puts the information back out here where it should have been in the first place. All right. I do believe that is all I have for you right now. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the business office. We're always happy to help. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day, and thanks for listening.